Hi, my name is Shelby and welcome to another month in the life of my sourdough starter. So I am trying to use my sourdough starter in so many different recipes. I'm trying to bake with it often and just get really creative, which is why I'm documenting this series for you guys. So I am making one of those super fun pumpkin sourdough loaves just in time for Thanksgiving and the holidays. I just mixed all of the ingredients together very simply, and now I'm doing a series of stretch and folds over the course of 2 hours with 30 minutes in between each stretch and fold. So I allowed the dough to bulk ferment until it doubled in size in my favorite little bulk fermenting glass jars, and I'm experimenting with the lamination technique to shape it and build lots of positive gluten strands. I'm new to this, you guys, and I'm just trying to experiment with all of the different techniques because I don't know which one at this point I'm going to be like, that's the technique I'm sticking with. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get it as flat as possible, as you can see here, and then I fold over one side like an envelope, and then you fold over the other side as well. So that's, because I'm not an expert, I haven't found my footing. You're going to see me do a lot of different techniques. I'm going to be doing coil folding, traditional just stretch and folds, and all different types of shaping techniques over the next few months. So now that I've got this shaped, I placed it in the baton to proof overnight in the refrigerator. You really want this to be a nice cold dough. It's easier to work with when you take it out the next day, especially since we're doing some fancy things to it. I'm cutting up butcher's twine. I believe I cut up a total of 6 and laid them over the top before flipping over the dough. I just placed my cutting board on top, flipped everything over, and then all of the strands of butcher twine are underneath now, which makes it so easy to tie up those strands. Now, this is really important. You don't want to tie them up too tight because you do want the dough to still have a little bit of wiggle room, as you can see right there, so that it can expand in the oven and not bust out the sides. Tie everything together and cut off your excess string. And optionally, I like to dust with some flour so that you can really see the scoring and do some scoring techniques to your liking. We'll also be posting links to all of my favorite sourdough equipment in the description if you're curious where I got certain things. So place your loaf in a preheated Dutch oven at 500 degrees for 20 minutes and 445 for the other 20 minutes, and then you are done. I put a little cinnamon stick in the middle to just finish it all off and have it be just this most adorable little loaf. This is perfect as a centerpiece for like Thanksgiving, anything like that. And I will note that the crumb is very tight, and it is probably because of the butcher's twine, just so you know. And I would also wait to add the cinnamon stick until it cools down. I did mess up with that. Today we are making 2 easy sourdough recipes. The first one is a sandwich bread recipe. I fed my sourdough starter the night before, that way it's active and it's nice and bubbly. And then I just mixed all the other ingredients together. My milk, the water, the salt, melted butter makes it super easy to mix, and then honey. Then you're just going to mix everything and then put a lid on it, set it aside for 30 minutes before you start your stretch and folds. Now with the pumpkin swirl, it's not like your typical discard recipe. The leavener solely is just active sourdough starter. I don't have baking powder, baking soda, or anything like that in there. I'm just putting all of the ingredients in a bowl and mixing it just like your traditional sourdough. And it's going to give you this kind of like quick bread cake type texture without it being too dense. It's going to have that natural kind of sourdough leavening effect to it, which is really great. Next, I'm moving on to my sourdough sandwich bread, and I'm just doing a few stretch and folds and then letting it sit for 30 minutes, repeating the same process with the pumpkin bread. I'm just building a little bit of tension because I'm not using leaveners and I want these to really rise in the oven. So I did this a total of 4 times over the course of 2 hours. So I let them rest for 30 minutes in between each stretch and fold, and each time the dough has built up more elasticity and more tension, and it's much easier to work with. But like I said before, this dough is a very high hydration, so it is best to dip your hands in water before working with it so it doesn't stick. And then I added the dough to my favorite glass jars with a straight edge so that you can see how much they have risen. I had these bulk fermenting on the counter for about 3 hours before I placed them in the refrigerator for about 1 hour. This is especially helpful with the pumpkin swirl because it's a really high hydration and it's a harder dough to work with. It's not so much necessary with the sandwich bread to have it cold before working with it. To be honest, it was bedtime for both my kids, so I wanted to make sure that these didn't over ferment, so I placed them in the refrigerator until I was ready to work with them. So that's a good option to do it if you're like, the timing isn't right. So I did the stitching technique and I folded the dough over itself to build some tension in that loaf pan. And then I actually stretched out a little bit more and did another kind of like fold into itself to make it more of like a loaf formation. I lined both pans with parchment paper. This just ensures that the dough won't stick to the actual pan. It is optional, but I really highly suggest it, especially for loaves that have like sugar in it that would caramelize and potentially burn. So I'm allowing this to rise overnight in the refrigerator. Next, I'm working on the filling for the pumpkin swirl. You're just melting some butter and mixing together the pumpkin puree, allowing that to cool down. I turned out the pumpkin swirl dough onto the counter, gently stretched it out. It is really important to work with this while it's cold, I would say, because it made it so much easier. Then I spread out the like room temperature melted butter mix and then covered it with about a 1/4 cup of brown sugar and dusted the top with cinnamon sugar and then a little bit of nutmeg. Next, you're going to very gently roll the dough onto itself, like as if it was a cinnamon roll. This is much easier when you're using like a bench scraper or something like that to kind of fold it onto itself. Use as much flour as needed. See here, I'm using a bench scraper to get it into the actual cast iron loaf pan, and it was a little bit sticky, but I'm telling you, it turned out fantastic. Then I placed both loaves in the refrigerator to proof overnight very slowly, and as you can see, they have definitely risen. So now it's time to bake them. I lathered each loaf with some butter just to give it that nice golden top and baked them on 350 degrees for about 50 minutes, give or take a little bit. And then voila, my house smelled like amazing, delicious, fresh bread. Now it's time to cut into these lovely loaves. So to start out with the pumpkin swirl, it looked fantastic, smelled so good. The sandwich bread is perfect if you don't want this like kind of harder crust that a typical sourdough loaf will give you. This is just like your ideal kind of like white bread without it, of course, just being white bread. It's sourdough. And then next, moving on to the swirl, this is awesome for like breakfast or anything like that. It's got that sweet quick bread type flavor without it just being dense like a cake, for example. I'm really attempting to not purchase bread, specifically sandwich bread, at the grocery store, so this is a really great recipe for that. This is another just standard loaf I have going on. So you're going to see a lot of kind of standard loaves because I'm just trying to figure that out first before I start adding like whole wheat and rye and all these different types of things. I still feel like I don't really know what I'm doing, which that's definitely true. Right now with this loaf, I'm practicing the coil folding technique where you're pulling it up very gently, almost like mozzarella cheese, and just folding it back on itself. Coil folding is another way of strengthening the dough and helping it develop gluten during the bulk fermentation, just as you would with a stretch and fold. So I'm just going to be honest, this dough was a little bit under fermented. I think I have a bad habit now of under fermenting my dough because I have over fermented it so many times. So now I'm like way underdoing it. Drop a comment and let me know if you also suffer from fear of over fermentation just as I do, because it's just, I got to get over this, and let me know if you have any good tips on not over fermenting your dough. This is just another technique to shape the dough and have it, be nice and tight. I do think after trying this and after trying the lamination technique, I really do like the lamination technique where you stretch it out super far as it can, and then like kind of refold it into itself. And then I'm just putting this in the baton overnight to proof in the refrigerator, and then taking it out the next day. I think part of the reason why sourdough is so interesting to me and why I keep coming back failure after failure is that despite your over fermented or under fermented doughs, it all tastes fantastic. And the fact is, I'm always chasing that perfect loaf. And when I do get a really, really good loaf, I so appreciate it. So that's why I just love the world of sourdough. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to stick around to hopefully see me bake off some more perfect loaves in the future. And please consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thanks.